With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right, even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say, no, you move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us today on this Friday. The weekend is finally upon us, and I know we're all thrilled about that. Thank you for joining us, whether you're on Facebook Live, on the Tactics Facebook page, or on the News Radio 1440 Facebook page, YouTube, Twitch, Periscope. However you're watching us, we appreciate you being with us and making us a part of your day and a part of the end of your week. So we actually do have something that we're going to do a little bit different. And I know that we usually start with local news, but as you might have remembered from our segment yesterday with Becky, there just wasn't a whole lot going on in the State House and Senate, and there's going to be some local news that we get to later. But this is certainly something that could be affecting something very local here in the next, year or so. There is a new disease that has been diagnosed, and that they're coming out and talking about some of the different symptoms, and it has to do with our school kids. And so if we have a large portion, a large plurality of our school children being diagnosed with this, kind of like ADD or ADHD, it could be something that affects a lot of local schools in the Alabama school system as a whole before too long. And so to discuss this and to talk about some of this, we actually have a special guest in studio with us today. John from Millbrook is actually going to be in studio with us for the remainder of this segment. So thank you so much for being with us this morning.
It's great. It's great to be on. They're calling this a disease.
This is a disease. This is...
I thought a disease was something you catch.
Not necessarily.
I know that. I do know that, yeah. But they make it sound like it's a regular, like a common cold or something.
Right. That is what's going on
That's
here.
my point, yeah.
It's called Oppositional Defiant Disorder. And this is something that the medical community has just recently come out with. It's a behavioral disorder. And I thought that I'd go ahead and just give you a little bit from the Mayo Clinic. They have an overview about it, saying that it causes behavioral problems. But sort of getting into it, here's the symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
It says, sometimes it's difficult to recognize the difference between a strong-willed or emotional child and one with oppositional defiant disorder. I think that we would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to tell the difference, almost like they're the same thing.
They are.
It's normal to exhibit oppositional behavior at certain stages of a child's development. So here they're already kind of hedging their bets when they're giving you the synopsis. And again, this isn't like some fly-by-night source. This is the Mayo Clinic's definition of this thing. And they're saying when they give their introduction, well, this thing's basically indistinguishable from just a strong-willed child. And then they say in the second sentence here, it's normal to exhibit oppositional behavior at certain stages of a child's development. Well, if it's normal, why are you diagnosing it as a disease?
That, when I started talking with people about this, and I've been sharing some information about it because I was completely appalled by it when I heard it.
Mm-hmm.
Because as a teacher for 27 years and being involved in education all of my adult life, and
I was about to say, even still today that you're retired, you still work with young people.
I do, all the time with our livestock club, and I helped some kids this week, in fact, as you well know. When I saw the list and I heard some of the things that they were talking about with this particular, and I call it a malady, maybe it could be called that, I don't know, but I do know this much. When I saw the list, the first thing that popped into my mind was that describes about 80 or 90% of the teenage boys that I taught for 27 years, which could add up to at least 1,500 kids. In my estimation, I don't see, and when a teacher that's taught a long time, that's dealt with teenagers in particular, and I don't have much experience with elementary kids except my own. When you see a list like this and you hear being unusually angry or irritable. Not just boys, girls.
Mhm.
Most of the young people, when they walked into my room, they didn't like being there.
Right, they were at school.
You had to talk them into getting excited about whatever it was you were going to do as soon as they walked in the door.
Be careful about bumping the camera. You're making me shake over here.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to do that. I'm not accustomed to being on camera, but...
And I know, you're like me, you talk with your hands. I understand that.
But someone frequently losing their temper. I mean, that happened daily with kids. But the problem with that is that you had so many of them, and they're acting as if this is something that you don't have any control over.
Right.
And the child doesn't have any control over, and you can't do anything about it. And I beg to differ.
I think that's my biggest problem with this whole thing is that usually when they come out with some sort of behavioral disorder, you can kind of see it to a certain degree, but by and large, they make it so broad and they encompass so many traits of so many kids that they're basically doing what's known as a rainbow statement.
Sure.
Which is they're throwing something out there that is so vague and so broad that it could make almost anybody qualify.
Sure, and that's what they want, because you can bet on there are going to be dollars tied to it.
Oh, absolutely.
They're going to be
medicine.
And on the education end, this is part of the problem too.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you an out. If there's a kid you can't control, you can't do anything with, then here's your out. Because you can't control this disorder that they have. As a result of that, then you're whipped to start with, and you can't do anything about it. And you can also write that one off and say, there's not much I can do about this one. They treat it like some other kind of disease. I can't cure cancer. I can't cure whatever, tuberculosis or whatever it may be that might have. And teachers think about that, and they say automatically, well, there's not a lot I can do about it. But here's the problem with this. Across the board, what this is going to do, as far as discipline inside the school, is going to be one more step in the wrong direction across the board in public education, whereas you won't find this in other education. You'll find it in public education only. They may identify it somewhere else, but I would tend to guess that they'll look at it. The principal, the head administrator at a private school will say, "That's stupid. We don't have that," which is true.
Sure.
Of course, they have teenagers that are angry and they're in their developmental stages and those kind of things. But kids change and they can adapt and they grow out of a lot of that after their behavior has been channeled in a different direction, and they've been able to do that. But I'll let you respond. But I was irate about it, to be honest, because I know what kind of problems.
Maybe you have the disease. That's the problem.
Yeah,
maybe so. Easily irritated by this.
I'm irritated by this thing because, and I'm not even teaching now, but I can guess. Don't think the kids won't find out about this. Well, and they'll use it to their advantage too. You can rest assured with that.
It's another excuse to justify behavior and say that it's not my fault that I'm doing X. And so that's the real problem I have with it. Just to give you a little rundown, that, like I said, the source that I'm using here is the Mayo Clinic. They say that the symptoms would include angry and irritable mood, often and easily loses temper, frequently touchy and easily annoyed by others, is often angry and resentful. That's most teenagers.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody that's been around teenagers would say that's the vast majority of teenagers. Argumentative and defiant behavior. Often argues with adults or people in authority. Often actively defies or refuses to comply with adults' requests or rules. Often deliberately annoys or upsets people. Often blames other for his or her mistakes or misbehavior. I don't even know that this is teenagers. That's a lot of adults.
Well, yeah, they grow into that too. I'll say this. We've gotten to the point now. This is kind of a catch-all because I could justify almost every teenager and put them into one of the categories that they have.
Right. For example, we were looking through that list that I just read to you. You would say that by and large, I was a fairly well-behaved, well-adjusted kid even when I was a teenager. Correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, not to the level I am now, obviously. I'm more mature, I hope, now than when I was 15. But the point is, I was a pretty even-tempered kid.
You were. You would act goofy.
Sure.
But, I mean, you weren't belligerent. You weren't.
But would you say that I often argued with adults and people in authority?
No.
Really?
No.
I thought that I would. I remember arguing a lot.
With who?
Well, with you, for one.
What do you mean? Around the house?
Sure.
Well, about debatable things, but not about what should be done. Does that make sense?
But my point is, I did argue with people. I mean, I can remember arguing with people a lot, including other teachers. I wasn't nasty or cruel or vengeful.
No, that's what I'm talking about.
But what I'm saying is, I did argue, and that's what.
Yeah,
that's the stipulation that's being used here.
Okay, I see what you're saying
adults
now.
or people in authority. I did that. I did that on a pretty regular basis. If a teacher was saying something that didn't make sense to me, I argued with them about it. Wasn't out of I didn't like them or anything. It was just by nature I like to argue, and I think that it actually helps people to engage in a back and forth to be able to develop their ideas.
And see, here's
defies or refuses to comply with adults' requests or rules. Now, if an adult told me to do something, by and large, I did it. But as far as the rules, I kind of skirted around the rules a good bit in high school. And so I'm just saying that you could take even a fairly well-adjusted, well-behaved kid, and because this definition is so incredibly broad, you could even put them into that category, at least on some of the grounds.
Okay, this is they're describing a very active kid here.
Sure.
Verbally, even physically. All right. Here's the problem with it, too. All right, you've got a kid that's withdrawn and shy. Then you could put them in the category of having an attention deficit disorder. They're not engaging. There's another category for them. So you have every base covered. You say, well, of course they have learning disabled people.
Sure.
But then you've also got exceptional people that are incredibly intelligent. And we've all known. My point is this. We got a category for everybody. Don't tell me we don't, because and I heard somebody, and they've been talking about this on Kevin's show. Right. I sent him a text about this. I heard a little bit
of that, yeah.
I sent him a text about this. He was blown away. He had no idea that they would even come. And I understand, because Kevin's 60 years old, 61, something like that. From our generation, and I'm younger than he is, but we couldn't even fathom coming up with something like this.
Right.
Because we got defiant. As Kevin said on his show, we got our butt whooped. My mama take care of the defiance. That wouldn't be a problem. I can get over my defiance.
Right. That was the solution.
That was the cure. It worked.
But what you're talking about too is saying that it's a catch-all. Listen to this, and this is again coming from my source at the Mayo Clinic. ODD may lead to problems such as poor school and work performance, antisocial behavior, impulsive control problems, substance use disorders, suicide. That is a wide range of results, because
say that when again, impulsive.
Right, but I mean, think about how much that encompasses.
Yeah.
It literally ranges everywhere from not making good grades to killing yourself.
Yeah.
That's such a broad range of results that this thing can come into that, for example, even a really broad sweeping definition disease, something that's become kind of an umbrella term like cancer. There's so many different kinds of cancer. It can result in so many different symptoms. Even it is more direct than that.
Well,
that's almost everybody.
Okay, we're different in this, of course.
Sure.
You look at the terms, you define things. You're talking about the overall view of it and that kind of thing. And what's conjured up in my mind are examples.
Right.
I mean, I can think of which one of these descriptions here would be given for a dramatic teenage girl that's 14 or 15. Sure. I mean, good grief, because they overstate everything practically. They come, this is the worst day in the history of the world. Well, no, it's not.
Well,
they come in saying that.
I have often compared politicians to teenage girls, because with politicians, part of the way that they come in to get elected is they have to act like every single problem is the worst problem the world has ever faced.
Oh, yeah, and it's not.
Yeah.
It's just like with politicians. They say, I heard someone say the other day, this is the worst time, and we are more at odds now than we ever have been in the history of this country in 200 and something. I'm saying,
Did they forget about the
Civil War?
Right.
The doggone Civil War where over 600,000 people died.
Right. We were killing each other.
And they say now...
That was pretty divided.
That's pretty divided. We had different governments.
Or like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez a few weeks ago saying that global warming is our World War II.
Right.
And I'm thinking...
millions of people died.
70 million people died in World War II. No people have died from global warming. You can't compare those two problems.
Oh, they say they have, though, because when anytime a hurricane hits, they say, well, we're getting in the weeds here, but
right.
This is the same
it's
kind
the same
of
thing.
The same
they
kind
blow
of mindset.
Everything out of proportion.
And this is one of those things, too, that is going to give it out to educators.
Sure.
And they know they can't discipline kids anymore because when you come in as a teacher now, and many people younger than I am and in my age, they'll say, oh, they don't tell the teachers that. Oh, absolutely they do, because when a new teacher comes in, they tell you, well, now, when the young person, if they're a young person, they say, okay, what am I supposed to do for discipline? And they will say, well, really, you can just send them to me because you really can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And people from my generation that haven't been in education, they go, oh, no, you're exaggerating. No, I'm not.
Right.
I know people, and they will tell you, no, you got to be kidding about that. Say, no, they're telling the truth when they tell you that. You mean, surely you can make them stand in the corner. No, you can't.
No, you can't.
Surely you can make them do exercises. No, you can't.
No. I was in that position, and they wouldn't let me do that.
Surely you can at least make them write sentences. No, you can't.
Yeah. It actually is against the rules.
It is against the rules to do anything to a kid. I hope somebody sees this and they'll say, oh, yes, you can. Okay, tell me what I can do. And that's what I want some of the people in education. And this is a symptom of what I was talking about the other day on one of the shows, and I've been talking about with people as to what is wrong with education. And the funding issue that came up in Montgomery just recently, and there were 100 and something teachers let go. And I got into some discussions online with different people. I said, that's not the fundamental problem. And, of course, they automatically assumed that I was against taxes, against education, and I wanted those teachers fired. No, I didn't. I didn't want the teachers to go away. I know how hard it is when you're overloaded with students. I know that as well as anyone does. I had the biggest room in the school.
Well, and another
Guess
thing,
where they put everybody when they didn't have anywhere to put them.
I know. I remember. But,
yeah.
But to your point, even you saying that doesn't mean that you're saying that the way that they handled it was correct. You were just saying that
that's not the problem.
It's not the core problem.
The core problem is our system has gotten so far away from being able to have a student-adult relationship that's proper, that will work.
Right.
Because now the child has the upper hand.
Oh, absolutely.
And when the child has the upper hand in things, you're letting children, and a grown man will allow a child to supersede his authority. I couldn't live like that.
No, and it's unfair to ask our teachers, many of whom are very dedicated, work very hard, sometimes spend their own money, work long hours. Nobody here is saying that teachers don't have an incredibly difficult job.
The
problem is they're making it more difficult than it needs to be.
Absolutely. And the thing is, the victims are the kids.
Ultimately, yes.
See, I feel for the kids more than even the teachers, because ultimately you're hurting the children by doing it that way. Children, as we've often heard before, and it's even cliche, I would say, kids want to be disciplined. They want parameters. Well, that may be cliche, but it's true. They want an adult to be a leader over them. They really do. And I'm not talking about when someone brings up something and say, oh, he wants you to just beat children and abuse. I've never done that in my life. Never. You don't have to do that. I would be the first one that would stand in line to want to throw someone in jail that would hurt a kid.
Of course.
Not talking about that, but you can discipline a kid without hurting them physically. Now, I believed in working their tails off, but that's good for them. You're not going to We worry so much about, we hear issues now about our children they're just lazy and they're not very physical and they're out of shape and their heart's not in good shape. They don't do anything. And they won't let the teachers make them do anything.
Let's also think about it from this angle. A lot of people are complaining that kids are having self-esteem issues.
Right.
And it's true.
It is true.
You look at it across the board, there are kids that have a dearth of meaning in their life. They don't feel a sense of purpose in a lot of circumstances. Well, let's look at that and look at why that might be. If you have been told your entire life that you're so fragile and incapable of doing something that you can't even pick weeds in a garden or do push-ups, that you're that fragile and you're that incompetent, don't you think that affects someone's self-esteem?
Absolutely. I believed in, my philosophy in the classroom was this: you break them down to build them up. And it's the same philosophy that's used in the military. It used to be.
Right.
You break them down to build them up. You're harsh on them to start with, and you give them some confidence, and they will gain confidence. As you well know from personal experience,
sure,
I gave them opportunities to build confidence.
Absolutely. The reason that I'm here today, the reason I'm able to do a radio show and had a radio career and now do video podcasts, the reason I do that is because of the skills that I learned largely in your class.
Right.
And I'm not the only one. There are other kids that have gone on to do other jobs in communication and jobs in completely different fields that are still using the things that were learned there, because you made kids get up in front of and yet embarrass some kids.
Of course it
got
did.
Over it.
Right. And I told the parents, I would say, some of them would come to me. Sometimes another teacher would come to me. I'd say, look, have a little faith in me and be patient. They'll be fine. I never had a kid to explode into fire because I put them up in front of other people.
Right.
And if I could give them enough confidence in something like that, and they will grow in confidence when you do something like that. And my point is this: see, now you're put into a position as an instructor that you're not allowed to do that if they have any trepidation at all about getting up in front of people, for example.
Well, that's the thing. You're barely allowed to do that, do anything now with just normal kids. Imagine when you add this thing of ODD. Well, they have a disease.
I think it's too late. The statute of limitations has gone away now. I think I've been out long enough. I did it with all of them. I did it with special ed kids. I did it with emotionally conflict kids. Didn't kill them. As a matter of fact, some of those kids probably gained more than anyone else did.
Sure.
They probably grew more. They probably gained more confidence than a lot of the, quote, normal kids, whatever a normal kid is. I don't know that I've ever run across a normal kid, to be honest, because they're all different anyway.
Sure.
Every kid was unique. I believed in that with all my heart, that it took different motivational strategies, and I learned each kid differently. They say, well, you need to treat them the same. That's the dumbest thing in the world to do, treat all the kids the same. You treat them fairly, but you don't treat them the same.
Right.
But I had kids that, and back to the discipline part of it.
Sure.
This thing puts a kid into a position where they can't ever learn from mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
They can continue to do the same thing over and over again, and
you can just write it off as, oh, that's just the disease.
Yeah, that's just a part of it, and there's nothing can be done about it.
Because
that kid will think that too.
Exactly, and the thing is, if they think they can't fix it, then they won't.
Right. And
if they think they can't help it, that their bad behavior is just the side effect of whatever condition it is that they have, they will never work to correct it because they think that it can't be done.
And it can be. You know, I've had young people to come up to me. They're grown now, 30, 35, 40 years old. And some of them that I still remember the names of, and the reason that I remember some names and don't remember some names is because the ones that gave me the most trouble, I remember their names. And the reason that I remember their names is because they stayed in trouble and I called their name a lot. And as a result of that, they did a lot of push-ups, and they did a lot of other things too. You know, I had kids that, and we're saying this on the air, and I don't know what kind of trouble it could get me into, but this was back then, and I guess it would have to change now if I were back in the classroom. But I had kids that did 100 push-ups every day. And they expected it if they did something wrong. because they were in pretty good shape. Now, I didn't make everybody do that many because everybody couldn't do that many as a result of it. But those kids, first of all those kids that did so many, I did a funeral a couple of weeks ago, as you know.
Right. One of your
I
students.
don't remember a single one of those boys that didn't come up to me and say, I remember doing all those push-ups for you. Every one of them said,
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, he said, I wish teachers could do that now. I said, isn't that a shame? I said, I appreciate you making us do them. They did.
Sure.
Without exception. I didn't have a single kid, and I don't remember a single boy in there. I didn't make girls do push-ups. I didn't have a single boy in there come up to me and say, you were cruel to me. You shouldn't have made me do that. Not a single one.
Mm-hmm.
Because kids appreciate discipline.
They do.
I've never heard a kid really that didn't brag about a whipping they got.
Now, sometimes it may take a little while. It may take a little
Right.
hindsight to do it, but eventually, yes, they do
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Because later on they think, all he was trying to get me to do is act better.
Yeah.
Try to put me in a position where I could learn something. I
By
wish
the
I
way,
had.
to bring us kind of back to the discussion about the disease, I did want to share this because I think you'll really appreciate this one. The Mayo Clinic, whenever they do one of these disease pages, wherever they write down everything, they have a few categories that they always include, and one of them is causes, because they want to inform people about what causes the disease, that kind of thing, mostly to help prevention. Here was what they had under causes for this one.
Yes.
There's no known clear cause of oppositional defiant disorder. Contributing causes may be a combination of inherited and environmental factors, including genetics, a child's natural disposition or temperament, and possibly neurobiological differences in the way that nerves and the brain function, and environment. Problems with parenting that may invoke a lack of supervision, inconsistent or harsh discipline, or abuse or neglect. So the causes are either genetics or environment.
Right.
What else is there?
There isn't anything else, and that's the
what
problem
I'm saying.
with that.
Literally anything could cause this.
Sure.
They've made it such a broad, sweeping thing that it could affect literally anybody, and they're saying, well, the cause could be anything. We have no idea.
Right. And you can take any child, I don't care who it is, any grown-up, I don't care who it is, you can say their problem's either genetic or from their environment.
Right.
Because you can blame anything on that, or give praise for anything on that.
I mean, that could be
one or the other.
That's the thing. That could be true of literally anything. That could be true of a sunburn or somebody being so psychotic that they kill 6 million people.
Yeah.
Either one of those two things, it falls into that category in some way.
Adolf Hitler.
That's what I'm saying. It could be literally anything.
Right. Or it could be the best kid in the history of mankind. Either way. And of course, your genetics have an impact on you, and your environment has an impact on you. It's how you relate. You can't help your genetics once you're born.
Right.
All you can do is learn how to react to the environment that you're in.
But what's going on here is that they have made the conditions for creating this disease in somebody so incredibly vague that it's meaningless. And that's one thing that I tell people, not that I'm an expert in law, but I tell people the same thing about laws and bills that we're talking about. If you're passing a law or a bill that is so vague that it's worthless, then it's not a good law.
It's not.
And it's the same thing here. If you're creating the parameters of how to prevent a disease, and it is so broad that it's like, well, it could literally be anything, well, then what's the point of writing it down? What's the point of diagnosing it in the first place?
Well, people have wondered why I've made such a big deal out of this.
Sure.
And I've texted it to people. I've put it on Facebook and those kind of things. First of all, it points out how stupid we are in education a lot of times. But it's certainly a symptom in our society of how wrong we are with regard to our young people.
Mm.
We are failing them because of things. And someone that's in education would say, we're just trying to help them. You're making them weak.
I know one of your favorite.
Reminds me of Remember the Titans. I mean,
that's hilarious. I was literally about to bring that up.
You're making them weak because of that. Denzel needs to do a speech about this. That would be outstanding.
We need to get Denzel Washington up.
Yeah, that would be good. And he could too. And when he was talking about it, oh, you dropped my football. And I think about things like that.
Oh, I can do that speech from memory.
And Petey didn't drop the football anymore either.
No. Or at least did his best not to.
yeah, he did. And so It's the same kind of things. We can't correct our kids when they mess up. And
But
when somebody acts a fool, you got to be able to rein them in.
But what's the difference that you just brought up in that analogy? Is that the teacher in that scenario, the character, of course, and I know it's a movie, but it's a good analogy.
But he was a real coach,
He
too.
is, yeah.
That was a true story.
Herman Boone is a real person.
Still living, in fact, yes.
In fact, John and Barry on our sister station did an interview with him one time.
Yes,
I
they
remember
did.
that.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about that story is he knew that the kids could be better than they were, and he expected them to rise to that potential.
You know,
and
at the end
of that, they did.
And listen, you go to the end of that show or that movie.
Right.
Look at the end of the movie, too.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those kids turned out really well, didn't they? Ministers, educators, policemen.
Right, and that part of the movie is based on their real life.
That's actually what happened. That's just what happened with those main characters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true in life, too, because we're all going to have to overcome things, and it's just overcoming anger. You better overcome anger because we're deceiving kids when we tell them when they're young it's okay to be that way. Because when they get into the world, they're not going to be able to keep a job.
Well,
because you can't be defiant. When the boss tells you to do something.
Right, you cuss out your boss. He's not going to care that you have ODD.
Right. You do it or he'll find somebody else to do your job.
Right.
And then if you get so defiant and you get physical, he will have your hind end arrested and you'll be in jail. I mean, that's the natural progression of this thing.
Well, that's one of the things that I've said for a really long time. And anytime that I talk about this, I know that there are people, especially educrats, that their heads explode when I say this. I've always said embarrassment is a largely underutilized teaching
absolutely.
tool.
I used it.
Right.
You cut my legs out from under me if I couldn't use some embarrassment.
But the reason I say that and the reason that I believe it is because, and I've always tried to frame it this way. Would you rather the kid be embarrassed in a school in front of a teacher and a bunch of kids, or would you rather him be embarrassed when he's 25 or 30 years old and he's got a family to feed and he might lose his job because of it? You embarrass them while they're kids where they can take it, where they're in a controlled environment, and then they're a lot tougher and can handle it a lot better when it actually counts out in the real world.
It is. Time after time they came to me with regard to the embarrassment. I'll share this real quick. I had a kid that I had to get up and do a speaking part.
Mm-hmm.
And that kid, for 3 weeks in a row, just lost it every time. And he was a 14-year-old kid, and he cried when he had to do it. And I finally had it to the top of my head, and some of the girls in there felt sorry for him, and they said, Mr. Colquitt, stop making him do that. I said, it's just upsetting him too much. He just can't do it. I said, oh, yeah, he can. Finally, the 4th week, I think it was, I broke down and said, all right, this is it. This is the last time we're doing this. I said, get your tail up there and finish it. I said, I know you know what it is. Finish it. I said, I don't care if it takes the rest of the day. I said, if we don't do anything else today, you're going to do this. I said, now get your tail up there and do it.
Mm-hmm.
They said, Mr. Colquitt. I said, no, we're going to finish this. You are not leaving this room until you do it. I said, I don't care if we have to stay here all day. I said, I'll keep you out of your other classes. I dug in. And when that kid did it and he finished it that first day, he got as loud of an ovation as anybody has ever gotten in my class, including with me.
Mm-hmm.
I clapped for him too. The next week, he did it just like everybody else did. A couple of weeks later, he came out of his shell, and I ended up having to make him do push-ups because he was talking too much. That is
created a monster.
I created a monster. Absolutely, that is the gospel truth about that kid. That kid came out of his shell, and he might have gotten in trouble a little bit more, but isn't that better than being so reserved he's even scared to ask a question or scared to talk to a girl?
Sure.
He got to the point he was sort of aggressive, and asking. He was flirting with girls and stuff. Made a difference in that kid's life. Now, I won't say his name. Some of the kids that saw this, they'd know exactly what I was talking about. He was in the 9th grade. He was 14, 15 years old. And that's one of those things they have to they talk about comfort zone all the time, and then sometimes when we make them come out of the comfort zone, then they pitch a fit about it.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It reminds me of something that I was reading from Jonathan Haidt a while back. And one of the things that he points out, and I thought that it was really profound, is he said there used to be, especially in America, just because it was kind of our culture and we had sort of the cowboy frontier kind of mentality, that we always believed that whatever didn't kill you makes you stronger.
Oh, absolutely.
He said in recent years, he's observed, and this guy's a psychologist, he said in recent years, I've observed, especially in young people, a growing mentality that whatever doesn't kill you makes you weaker. In other words, when you're faced with some kind of obstacle or you're faced with something that's difficult for you to overcome, the immediate reaction by especially a lot of younger people now is to shrink away from it and try to find a way around it instead of enduring. And used to, Americans were kind of known for being the cowboys that did things that were really difficult, and we've lost a lot of that sort of pioneer spirit, and he attributes a lot of our nation's problems specifically to that. That's the reason that we were just talking with Becky Garrettson the other day about the safe space thing with college campuses, where they think that there's places they need to be protected from ideas that make them uncomfortable.
That's embarrassing.
It is.
A safe place. I mean, I understand having a safe place if somebody's going to attack you physically, but because something didn't go your way politically or something, I mean, good grief.
Well, this person is saying things that makes me feel uncomfortable. I need to be freed from that. That doesn't make any sense.
I say grow up. And, well, let me say this about the embarrassment from a while ago.
Sure.
And I was the same way. It doesn't make any difference about what it was. You know this. I didn't embarrass one kid. I embarrassed them all. Some weren't embarrassed necessarily because some of them were completely comfortable in doing some of the things I had them to do.
Well, and I would say that I was more in that camp.
Oh, yeah,
on that
absolutely.
Stuff. But you did embarrass me. You had to do it different ways.
I did it with all of them. I mean, I was clean cut across the board, and that's why it worked, because in that situation, everybody expected it.
Right. You weren't singling anybody out.
No, I didn't single anybody. Loved all of them, wanted them all to do well. And that's the way it turned out. And getting back to this defiance disorder.
Sure.
I hope somebody has their grown-up drawers on and can recognize this for what it is and pull funding on it and say, look, this is closely akin to the drama that we have with climate change.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same kind of junk.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying. I think that this thing is mostly garbage, but...
Yeah, but it's garbage with teeth in it, though. It's garbage with funding. It's garbage with lawsuits behind it.
Right, and I understand that, but I'm just kind of going to the larger point here.
Right.
Regardless of the actual practical application. I think that this is mostly garbage, but the point is there are kids that tend to be more defiant, have more anger. That happens occasionally, but what bothers me about having this categorized as some kind of disease that you could diagnose just about any teenager in existence right now with, the problem that they're doing this is it goes back to what I was just saying with Jonathan Haidt. It is an excuse to avoid overcoming your own shortcomings.
Right. And let me tell you how it's going to affect people in education. This is going to come out in summer programs, in workshops. You're going to have special ed teachers that are going to be doing instruction to the staff about this and how to handle it and how we need to back off of what we do when kids get defiant and those kind of things. Is going to weaken the whole school. Yeah. I guarantee you, I promise you.
Which is really troubling considering how we're already...
Right, we are. And also, and the principal, right on cue, he's going to get up and say, we got to, we'll have to document, make sure that we back ourselves up so we don't get in trouble with the law. And most in-services were where fear tactics were used to scare teachers from doing things. That's primary focus of a lot of what, not all of it, but a lot of what we did at the beginning of the year was scare tactics against the teachers.
Sounds almost like you've done this before.
Yeah, I have. And I saw it over and over again. And I'd whisper to one of the teachers and I'd say, here it comes again. We're going to be, the beauty of it was, from my vantage point, is I knew I didn't have anything for anybody to get anyway.
Right.
I could lose my job, but they couldn't take much from me because I didn't have a whole lot anyway.
Can't get blood from a stone.
Right. And I guess that's how I think that's how people would, with the discipline, if we could use some good, wholesome discipline across the board, we could fix our schools in our state. I don't know you'd have to blow up Montgomery's system, not the people, but you'd have to start over in Montgomery. You'd have to start over in Montgomery just about it to make any headway down here, because it's just such a lost cause at this point, and they're not going to do anything to anybody down here, and they'll all talk about it, and they'll talk to death, but they just won't do anything. And I would love for someone to say and point out how I'm wrong with that, because the school system here is just a disaster. And
that's the problem you run into.
And they're not using discipline down here at all, and people avoid this place like the plague. As soon as they get the other job opportunity in the river region outside of this county in Montgomery, they will go somewhere else.
Or a whole bunch of them will work in Montgomery but live somewhere else so that they have better schools.
Yeah.
That happens a lot too.
Yeah, it's a shame down here, and that's an example. Montgomery is a wonderful example of how taking discipline out of the school, what happens to it.
Mm-hmm.
The good people avoid it. The others are still there, and it's sad because they're smart kids there too that are being lost. They're talented kids in this system that are being lost, and the grown people aren't doing anything about it.
Well, and like you said earlier, it's really the kids that are the ones suffering the most, because the teachers, they'll be fine. They'll still get their paycheck, ultimately, even if their job's harder. Mm-hmm. But the kids, they don't get those years back.
No, they don't. And I'm hoping that people will recognize this as a symptom of something that's greater. And I think most people just put education out of their mind when their kids are out of it. They're concerned about it then. They've already been through it themselves. If they get away from it any distance from it, they don't worry about it.
I'm guilty of that because I don't have any kids. I don't have anybody in the system, and so I don't think about it on a day-to-day basis.
It bugs me because I dedicated my life to young people.
Sure.
It's glaring to me when something like this happens. And I already see the outgrowth of some of the things that have transpired, so...
All right. Well, thanks so much for being with us, John from Millbrook. We're going to go to a break, and we'll be back in a minute.
And now for a reading from the Social Justice Warrior Bible with Pastor Gregory Post.
Welcome in. I'm Gregory Post, head pastor at the Eternal Living Word Trans-Denominational Community Church and Coffee House in Novato, California. And now for a reading from the SJW Bible. Today's reading will be from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 7, verses 2 through 10. And a centurion's slave was sick and about to die. When he had heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come save the life of his slave. When they came to Jesus, they earnestly implored him, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this to him, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built our synagogue." Now Jesus was triggered upon hearing this and said, "None of the good things he has done matter, because he is a slave owner, and we must never admit that anyone that ever owned slaves is capable of doing anything good. Furthermore, instead of asking me for help, you should have passed universal health care by now so that he could receive treatment for free." Then Jesus started on his way with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying, "Lord, do not trouble yourself further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I am also a man placed under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it." Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him, and turned and said to the crowd that was following him, "I say to you, this man is engaged in systematic oppression. He is clearly engaging in wage slavery by controlling the means of production to exploit the labor of those around him." Then Jesus gathered up a mob and protested on the centurion's lawn all night long with torches and signs reading, "Down with the patriarchy," terrifying him and his family. We never really found out what happened to the centurion's slave. Wow. So inspiring. Thank you for listening to this reading of the SJW Bible. And remember, the only truth that matters is your truth.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. We're going to close this one out here in just a little bit. Got a couple more topics, but I did want to make mention of this. My friend Melanie She has just commented, and let's see, where is she? Got to bring this up real quick. There we go. Yeah, my friend Melanie asked, are these episodes podcast? Yes, they are. They're available here on News Radio 1440's Facebook page, Tactics Facebook page, and also on YouTube. So if you ever want to catch any of those archived episodes, for anybody that happens to be listening has the same question as Miss Melanie, you can check those out on the Tactics YouTube channel. So just go to YouTube, search for Tactics. It should be one of the first things that pops up. You can check out all of our videos there. We have the full episodes, and we also have little snippets, excerpts from each of the episodes that are just one topic apiece, and all of the chaplain's reports as well. And a few extra things, things that happen over at the church that aren't necessarily here in the studio, aren't necessarily in the regular showtime. We also have some of those videos available to you there. So we got plenty of content for you if you are interested in seeing some of my other material. But thank you so much for that. And thank you to John from Millbrook for swinging by and having that conversation. It's always good to have your dad come to work with you, and it's even better when he can help you with your work. So there you go. Thank you so much, John from Millbrook, for sticking with us on that. Now, we do have a couple of international things to talk about. The biggest thing probably would be what's going on with tariffs. As you may know, we actually hiked the tariffs on China because we were involved in trade negotiations. They were supposed to actually be enacted on January 1st, but the Trump administration decided to delay the hike in taxes because there were ongoing negotiations. We were talking back and forth with them. We didn't want to go ahead and whack them with the stick until we knew that there was actually a reason for that, and so these negotiations have been going on for some time. Well, they kept getting delayed and kept getting delayed. And here we are. China has still not met the demands of the Trump administration. So at midnight last night, we hiked taxes on China. And so you can understand how significant this is. Chinese goods are currently taxed at a rate of about 10%. They just got boosted to 25%. So 150% increase. This is nothing to sneeze at. You're seeing now 25% tariff on goods. And the reason that this is so important is because China is one of the countries we import the most from. You're looking at things that are especially typically produced in China. You're looking at things like bikes. That's one thing. And another thing that you're really looking at is textile industry. And one of the things that I'm very concerned about is this is going to especially hit hard if you're thinking about buying new clothes for the summer, buying new clothes for your kids. I mean, you're going to be looking at t-shirt prices at Walmart. A t-shirt that used to be $7-8 is now going to be about 20. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration. Since 25% tax hike, you're probably going to see them be about more like 10 or 12. But the point is, you add that up, and that happens to several different items of clothing when you throw them in your cart. Boy, it adds up to an awful lot, especially if you've got a larger family. And so this is really going to be something that hits the average person hard. This is going to be about $2 billion worth in taxation. So a huge, huge tax spike, and not something that is going to be doing well. Not something that is going to be taken lightly by American families. Now, let's look at this and look at the rationale behind it and everything to try to fully understand how we got here. Apparently what was going on, and the reason that we finally decided to stop delaying on tariffs and actually put those taxes forward, is primarily because China apparently had backed out of some agreements. So this is sort of the running narrative right now, and I have no reason to disbelieve it, but the way that it goes, the way that the sort of estimation is right now, based on the little information that we have, a lot of these conversations, of course, take place behind closed doors, and so we don't have perfect information on it. But based on what we know, we think that probably what happened is that China had more or less agreed to a lot of the demands, maybe not all of them, but there was a deal more or less on the table, and then in the 11th hour, China decided, yeah, we're going to not do that anymore. And part of that is because of the way that the president responded to it. We've also got some inside sources from those that were engaged specifically in those talks that kind of suggest that we were making a lot of progress and that we were close to a deal the past couple weeks, and then all of a sudden everything seems to be off the table which is highly suspicious, and that would lead people to believe that the Chinese were more or less on board with everything up until really about a day or two ago, where they decided, yeah, we're not going to go along with that deal that had been put on the table. So that's probably what happened. That we were right on the cusp of a deal, and they decided to weasel out at the last second, which I guess is their prerogative to do. There's no rule against it, obviously. But the question is, why did that take place? Well, a lot of people are wondering if this is a sheerly political move by President Xi, or as I like to call him, President 11, because it's XI. So President 11, I think that what's going on with him is that a lot of people have talked about how it's interesting that President Xi and President Trump are together on this, and they seem to be having problems, and they seem to be constantly knocking heads on trade because they have very similar personalities. In other words, President Xi specifically sees himself as very much a tough guy and somebody that fights for the average working people of China, and Trump kind of sees himself in a similar light. And so because their tough guy image is very important to both of them, and I'm really not trying to dumb this down or say that that's the only reason, but they're saying that that may be a contributing factor to the reason that President Xi is saying, well, we don't want to give too much away, not because it would hurt his economy, but primarily because it would hurt his image. It would make him look weak on the world stage. And that's something that we know that Donald Trump is very much averse to as well, which would explain part of the reason why they may be having some trouble reaching some deals. I'm not saying that that's the only factor. We don't have any inside information that suggests that. I'm just saying, based on the characters that are in play, and based on the way things seem to fall apart at the last minute, something probably happened there. That's the best estimation that we can give right now. But the market really has been incredibly good. I mean, incredibly good. And it's just such a shame that we're having to deal with all this, and the market has really been taking a plunge. The stock market, luckily it did make a lot of recovery today, back to almost where it started, but it took a nosedive this morning. And people were very concerned that something that was that drastic when the stock market opened this morning. They were really concerned. Luckily, it made a bounce back, and it got pretty close to where it was when it opened. But it was scary there for a second. And because of that, we're not really sure. There's some questions about that, but it's just such a shame because this economy is really good. I mean, the economy has been sailing smoothly for a while, and having a 15% tariff hike on one of our biggest trade partners is no small matter when it comes to how well the economy is doing. Because if you're looking at the different areas, unemployment has hit a 50-year record low. The last time the unemployment numbers were this good was in 1969. Now, to give you a little context on that, I'm almost 30. I'm going to be 30 in June. My mother was born in 1969. That's how long it's been since the unemployment numbers were this low. So yeah, the economy is doing very, very well. And President Trump's policies are a part of that. I've always said that every president gets both more blame for the economy if it's bad and more credit for the economy than it's good than he actually deserves. That's just sort of a general rule, that presidents have some influence, but they don't have a ton of influence, and because of that, they tend to catch a lot of flack if it's terrible and an awful lot of praise if it's good. In Obama's case, he was doing some policies that were not particularly good for the economy. He backed off of those a little bit in his later years, and it started getting a little better. But when Trump came in, his policies really helped. I mean, it was like you just threw some nos into the economy, because it just started doing so much better under him, really even before he started doing any policy changes, just because of the attitude and the pro-business kind of rhetoric that he was coming in with. It started changing the way that people were thinking about the future of business in the United States. And so it really did have a very profound effect on this economy. And you not just looking at the unemployment, which is, it's a decent rubric. I wouldn't say that it's a great rubric. The labor participation rate is a little bit more accurate, a little bit more reflective, even though it has its downsides too as far as measuring how many people are actually working. But not to take anything away from the really good unemployment numbers, I'm just saying that it's not necessarily the go-to statistic when it comes to that. But you can also look at wages. If you're looking at average hourly wages, which have been rising steadily, it went from about $18.50, so $18.50 on average in America, to about $21.25. That's the average wage in America if you're looking at the period from 2009 to 2016. So that would be the Obama years. 2009, 2016, we're looking at a decent raise in average wages. Keep in mind that's not adjusted for inflation, which we did have two big quantitative easing periods during Obama's term, so those numbers would be slightly inflated. But nonetheless, that was the growth that we had under the Obama administration. In the period since then, 2016 to now, they've gone up 21.25 when Obama left office to 23.25. So that's a $2 increase in only about 2.5 years. Now, to give you an understanding of what that would be, that means in Obama's 8 years, his 2 terms, he saw about a 14% increase. Donald Trump has only been in office for 2.5 years, and he already has a 9% increase. He's coming close to lapping Obama, and he's barely halfway through his first term. And if these rates continue to climb and they continue at the rate that they're going now, then Donald Trump's average hourly wage is set to outpace Obama's before the end of his first term. So wages will have risen more under President Trump than President Obama before his first term is even completed. Based on my calculations and based on the calculations of some other people that are a lot smarter than me, we're looking at this, if he continues at his current pace, it'll be about late 2020 when he actually has more average wage increase than President Obama. So he will have reached that point in only 4 years that it took the Obama administration to go in 8 years, and that's ignoring the fact that we had 2 really big shots of inflation during those 8 years of Obama's administration, which would mean the growth rate is actually more. It's actually happening faster under President Trump. But there are other rubrics to look at too. For example, small business owners, they have confidence in the economy that is at a 40-year high. 40 years. And if you're looking at the level of small business owner confidence in the economy, Trump has 2 out of the top 3 confidence ratings. It was a little down this month. It wasn't the top one. It wasn't record-setting in that sense. But Trump has the highest one ever recorded. And out of the top 3, he's got 2 of them. And you know who has the other one? Ronald Reagan. So by any rubric that you're looking at it, especially if you're looking at small businesses, you're not necessarily looking at big corporations. You're looking at small businesses right now and their confidence, and they've been in this economy for 2.5 years now. Their confidence rating is very high. It's at a 40-year high right now. So it's 59% overall confidence rating amongst small business owners. And by the way, the more employees this business has, the more confidence they have. In fact, if you're looking at it, the highest rating was 77% confidence for business owners with 50 or more employees. So just so you know, the definition of a small business is under 200. So if you've got 50 or more, they're saying 77%, almost 80% of small business owners are saying, yeah, we have a lot of confidence that the economy is going to be really good. And that may actually explain why we had a bounce back in the stock market. Not from the small business owner's perspective, but there is a lot of confidence that the Trump economy is going to do well. And so because of that, even though the tariffs hit and there was a big dip at the beginning, it looks as though a lot of investors are saying, okay, this is really scary and really uncertain, but since Trump is in the White House and he's a very pro-business person and the economy's been really good so far, maybe we shouldn't react too much. And that's probably the reason for some of that buyback. So Trump's good policies on the economy have earned him some good graces in the minds of a lot of business owners. And I actually believe, and I contend, that that is the reason that you're seeing some of that recovery happen after today's big stock market dip. And you have to keep in mind, a lot of the Trump economy and the reason that's doing so well is because you've got a lot of deregulation and a cut in taxes. Now, the cut in taxes for individuals was only about 2% across the board, but you're looking at a drastic decrease in corporate taxes down to about the world average, right around 21%, where we were finally able to get somewhere close to the corporate tax rate of other countries we were competing with. That's huge. I mean, being able to bring that down, that was a shot in the arm to the economy that we haven't seen in a long, long time. And it's the reason that you're seeing these numbers. So, granted, some of the really good numbers recently may have actually been because people were buying up in anticipation of the tariffs. In other words, they're saying the economy is going to take a hit if these tariffs actually go through. We better go ahead and hedge our bets and go ahead and buy more than we normally would to kind of prepare for the rainy day that we think might be coming. That's certainly possible. I don't think that it is economically unfeasible to believe that that's part of what was going on. But it wouldn't explain everything else that happened before the talks about tariffs were even happening. And so I do think that at least part of the recent, and I would say recent, the past few months, some of the recent spending that you've been seeing is in part because people were worried about tariffs, and so they're going ahead and sort of buying now so that they won't lose money later. That could certainly be part of the reason that we're seeing some of these good numbers. But just to give you kind of an idea of where Trump himself and the Trump administration seems to stand right now on tariffs and the likelihood of this continuing, honestly, based on some of Trump's tweets, it's not looking super optimistic. Here was the first one that he sent out today. Talks with China continue in a very congenial manner. There's absolutely no need to rush, as tariffs are now being paid to the United States by China of 25% on $250 billion worth of goods and products. These massive payments go directly to the Treasury of the U.S. All right, so there's a couple things that we need to unpack here. First of all, the main thing that everybody is worried about is right here, there's no need to rush. And the reason that is scary for some people is because they're saying, well, there's no need to rush, which would mean that these negotiations could go on for a really long time. And if the negotiations go on for a really long time, the tariffs would last for a really long time. And by the way, we have already seen China ratcheting up its threats for increasing tariffs on us. There was that whole back and forth that happened, I think, earlier last year, where Trump was saying, well, we're going to raise them 15. And then China was like, well, we're going to raise them more than that. And again, it was sort of a microcosm of what always happens in these trade wars, which is nobody ever actually wins a trade war. There's just casualties of consumers that get taxed to death. That's the only thing that ever happens with this. Because once one country enacts taxes, then the other country enacts more taxes. And then before you know it, you're somewhere in the 35, 40 percentile range on tariffs, and everybody has more expensive stuff. It's a really terrible way to try to run an economy. And that's the reason that there's nobody that ever actually wins a trade war. But nonetheless, that's what's going on. And that kind of brings me to the second point here, where he's saying that this money is going directly into the United States Department of Treasury. Well, yes, but you're not answering the question of where it comes from. You see, on tax day, April 15th, and whenever, beforehand, you weird people that do it before April 15th, that do your taxes, well, that money goes right into the U.S. Treasury too. The question is, where does it come from? Like, whether or not we're going to say money in the U.S. Treasury is a good thing largely depends on where that money came from. If it came from the American people, then money flowing into the Treasury Department is not a good thing, and that's exactly what happens in tariffs. Yes, they are taxing the imports themselves, but where does that cost go? Inevitably, just like every other business tax, the consumer is the one that pays for it. If you were to put a 20% tax on ice cream tomorrow and you were just going to tax all of the ice cream vendors And I just use ice cream because I really want some ice cream right now. But if you were to just decide to tax, we're going to tax ice cream vendors. And every time they sell a cone, we get 20% of that. Do you really think the ice cream vendor is going to go, darn, guess I got to pay 20% and take that out of my pocket every time I sell an ice cream cone? No. And the Chinese are exactly the same way, or every other country, they're exactly the same way. When all of a sudden that happens, they're going to charge 20% more for their product. They're not going to pay for it. The consumer is going to pay for it. And so tariffs, like all taxes levied by the U.S. government, are a tax on the U.S. citizen, not the country. So yeah, there is money pouring into the U.S. Treasury coffers, but that's a tax increase on Americans. And so this is why it's so incredibly disingenuous. It's a sneaky way to increase taxes. Look, with President Trump, I'm really grateful for the tax cut that we got. I just credited that tax cut to a lot of the success that the economy has been experiencing, and I stand behind that claim. But if you cut taxes in this area only to increase taxes in this area, then what good did the tax cuts do? You're going to undo all of the progress that your administration has made. And that's really the problem that we're running into, and the reason that the markets are really worried about this, because he's saying, it may last a while, we may have taxes, we may have these extra tariffs for a really, really long time. Think about it from your own personal perspective. To understand why this is so detrimental to a market, take it from your own personal finances. If you were to find out tomorrow, let's say that you're married, have a couple kids, and you have a wife and she has a job, and it's a good job and it pays good, but you know that you would really struggle to support your family and to support your current lifestyle if you had to depend on just her income. Well, let's say that you got notice from your employer, we may have to downsize. And we don't think that you'll lose your job. I wouldn't rule that out as a possibility, but there's at least a chance that something's going to happen, like we have to do a cut in pay or something like that. We don't know. We'll let you know in a little while. Okay, well, if that happens, you are not going to make any big purchases. If you've got this imaginary sword of Damocles sort of circling above your head, and you have no idea whether or not it's going to fall, well, then you react differently. And if that happens, you probably still, you probably still go out and spend money to a degree, but you're certainly not going to make a lot of life-altering purchases. You're not going to buy a house. You're not going to buy a car. You're basically going to stick to the necessities, and anything that you were thinking about purchasing, anything that was a big-ticket item or anything that was going to cost a lot of money, maybe you were thinking about having another kid, well, let's hold off on that until we find out what our finances are going to look like. Markets do exactly the same thing. When you're running a business, you may be dealing with millions or even billions of dollars in a business deal, but the concerns are exactly the same. If all of a sudden you make a product and your product relies heavily on a product that is made in China, then you're not going to be somebody that makes a whole lot of investments or spends a lot of money in R&D, because you're still trying to figure out what your expenses are going to be tomorrow. It's the same reason that regulation was such a problem in the Obama administration, because people didn't know, based on the regulation and the new federal mandates that were going to come down on top of them, they had no idea whether their cost of production was going to be increased by 20% tomorrow or not. There was so much new regulation coming out every single day that the markets were completely volatile and uncertain, and markets despise uncertainty for exactly that reason, for exactly the psychological reason I just laid out. It's not wise to spend a lot of money in a market that you don't know what it's going to be like tomorrow. And that's the reason that you saw this massive dip in the stock market. It's the same reason that people are really hesitant to make a lot of investments and spend a lot of money in research and development, thinking about launching a new product line. You're less likely to incur risk, and money is made when risk is incurred. You're a lot less likely to incur risk when the market is uncertain. And that's the reason for this, and that's the reason that tweets like this from the president really scare people, because he's saying, I don't know, it may come up at any time. Now, here's another tweet that was made just this afternoon. This one's a little bit more recent, that kind of gives the same idea. And the important part of this is, if you look at the end there, in the meantime, the United States has imposed tariffs on China, which may or may not be removed depending on what happens with respect to future negotiations. Well, now that's about as vague as it gets. It doesn't get a whole lot more vague than, well, it may or may not happen depending on what happens. Well, can you tell us at least what the reaction is going to be if China does X? Like, if China does X, are we going to do Y? No, it's just, well, they may be there, they may not, and the only way that we'll know whether it'll change is based on what China does. Well, what China does, that could be anything. That's so incredibly vague and so incredibly broad that you have no idea how to react to that. And you have no idea how to sort of hedge your bets and try to make way for what's going to come next. Honestly, even though I think tariffs are a horrible idea and I just laid out a case why, I think that it would even be better to say the tariffs are going to be here to stay for another 6 months than it would be to say, yeah, we don't know when they're going to end. They may never end. We don't know. Like, in my mind, even that's worse for the market, because at least if you knew that was going to happen, you could start making preparation. At least if you knew that was going to happen or this was going to go away at a certain point, then you could make preparation. And I understand from a negotiating perspective, you don't want to put a time limit on yourself. But I'm saying from a market perspective, if you are going to take that risk of not giving a definite time period, you need to understand the market is not going to like that. That there are going to be consequences for not laying that out. And so it's just important to be very aware of that. But Donald Trump actually tweeted out something else that I think is even more important. He says here, tariffs will make our country much stronger, not weaker. Just sit back and watch. In the meantime, China should not renegotiate deals with the U.S. at last minute. This is not an Obama administration or the administration of Sleepy Joe who let China get away with murder. And I will go ahead and start out by saying this. The last part of that tweet actually is incredibly important and does make a lot of sense. It's important to note that, to a great degree, the Obama administration was soft on China in a lot of ways. We actually just talked about the other day how incredibly lax they were on China taking over the South China Sea. And I think that a lot of that may or may not have had something to do with, and I think that it did, personally. I just don't have the evidence to back it up yet. I think a lot of that may have had something to do with the incredibly shady business deals going on with Vice President Joe Biden's son. But nonetheless, you're looking at that tweet and you're looking at the content of it. This is the reason that I think tweeting stuff like this from the president actually weakens his negotiating power. It actually weakens his ability to negotiate with the Chinese by saying that, well, tariffs make us stronger. If you're saying that you believe that tariffs are an ultimate good, in other words, you believe that tariffs are a positive thing and that they make the country, as he was saying, much stronger, because that's how I read things in all caps. That's I imagine how Trump would have said it. When you're saying that tariffs are actually a good thing and they are an economic benefit and that you would like to hold on to them for as long as you can, well, if I'm somebody that I'm negotiating a trade deal with somebody that believes that, I'm sitting there thinking, well, man, he may never want to get rid of these tariffs. He may want to hold on to them for a long time. He's going to request, or he's going to want, an awful lot from us to be able to pull that off. I think the wiser negotiating strategy would be for President Trump to basically take the same approach as Larry Kudlow, one of his economic advisors, and this is one thing that other people in the Trump administration have tried to make the case for. John Bolton would be one of them. Basically say, look, tariffs are a terrible thing. We don't like them. We don't think that they're an economic good, but we do think it's important to use them as leverage to try to get them to lower their own tariffs. Now, historically, this has always been a bad idea. It's never really worked. We've never been able to effectively use the threat of tariffs in a meaningful way against other countries. And that's the reason that I think that this is a really bad idea. But at least if that's the motive, at least if that's where they're coming from, you can kind of see it. You can kind of look at that and see, okay, well, I disagree with the method, but at least the intent is good. What President Trump is basically saying there is that he believes that tariffs make the country stronger, that tariffs ultimately are a good thing for the economy, and they're not. Every piece of historic and economic data shows that they are a disaster for economies. But there's President Trump basically saying the exact opposite of his own economic advisors in this case. And so the reason that that is a problem is the markets now are sitting there going, I don't know what to do. The president's saying he likes tariffs. The president's saying that he thinks tariffs make us stronger. He may want to hang on to them for a while. And so you as a small market investor, or you as the president of China, you're sitting there going, I don't know how to take this. And this mixed messaging from the Trump administration, I really do think stems from the idea that the truth is President Trump likes tariffs and he does think that they are an ultimate good. Everybody surrounding him does not. The president has roughly a second grade education level of understanding when it comes to world trade, and he's surrounded with his advisors whom he trusts and who like the president and want the president to succeed, all telling him, no, Mr. President, hanging on to tariffs is a really bad idea. So why don't we just use them as leverage to try to do something about other countries using the tariffs? And so they're essentially trying to mold a positive, logical economic narrative around Donald Trump's illogical narrative of tariffs are good things. And so they're trying to make reason out of non-reason, essentially. And that's really the problem that they are constantly running into. And I think they're doing the best that they can, but they're dealing with somebody that thinks that tariffs are actually ultimately a good thing. And they're trying to explain to him, no, this is a really, really bad idea. So why don't we just use it this way, and then we'll get rid of tariffs as soon as they lower them. If the end goal were to actually get to free trade, were actually to get to 0% tariffs, where everybody was trading tariff-free in a free market, I would love that. And if Trump actually pulls that off, I'll eat my hat. More power to him. More power to the president if he can actually pull that off. You will see me happily come on the air and tell you, guys, I got it wrong. But I'm not seeing that from the president, and the tweets kind of don't reflect that. You're seeing this very much a mixed message coming from President Trump, and I think that's largely because his advisors understand that his stance on tariffs is not good for the country. In fact, if you're asking me, I think that this economy, which is already doing really well, would surpass the 80s and maybe even the 20s as the most economically prosperous presidential administration in American history if President Trump were to lower tariffs right now, because the economy is already doing so well that if we didn't have these tariffs, which are already causing all kinds of problems in the market, we've already seen them. I saw a report the other day that the average appliance has gone up about $100 on average. If you're looking across the board, you're seeing an average rise in prices on appliances because of the steel and aluminum tariffs for approximately $100 per appliance. So this is really having a detrimental effect on the economy already. You get rid of tariffs altogether, I'm telling you, this economy is going to skyrocket. You are going to see economic numbers like you've never seen before. So that being said, let's go ahead and we're going to wrap it up here with the Daily Dose of Stupid.
No, you messed it up. You're stupid.
Oh, well, it appears that I have messed that up, so we're sorry about that. Yeah, scratch that. Sorry, we're going to go ahead and go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Today's Chaplain Report, we're going to do something a little different, and we'll continue with our series on Daniel a little bit later, but Sunday is Mother's Day. And I thought it would be appropriate to just do a little something special for the moms this Sunday. So because of that, we're going to look at this passage and to understand what's going on in this verse. This is a letter from Paul to Timothy, somebody who he considers his son in the faith, and he's trying to instruct this young preacher on how to most effectively share the gospel of Christ. And those letters are something that is, you can tell it really means a lot to Paul. And he really is concerned with Timothy's well-being, his spiritual growth, all of these things, and he really does kind of talk like a father to him. And there's this really beautiful passage in the first chapter of his second book in 2 Timothy 1, verses 5 through 6 here. If I can ever get it pulled up. There we go. For I am mindful of the sincere faith within you, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am sure that it is in you as well. For this reason I remind you to kindle afresh the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. One thing that's so great about that passage there is it really is Paul admonishing the good work that Timothy's mother and grandmother did in shaping who he is as a man. Now, there's a couple things to note here. First of all, there are people without a strong foundation of faith. A lot of them. There are a lot of people that did not grow up in an ideal environment, and we don't know a whole lot about Timothy's family situation other than what we read here in the scripture. Since we know that he was half Greek, and it seems as though his mother is Jewish, well, we can kind of assume that the dad was Greek at that point. But we don't see a whole lot of information on him, but we do know about his mom. And we do know that his mom was somebody that was strong in the faith, and that her mother raised her in such a way that she was strong in the faith. And because of that, she raised Timothy in a way that was conducive for him becoming a strong Christian as well. And that's an important point here, because faith can't be inherited, but it can be passed on. And that may seem contradictory, but here's what I mean. You don't inherit it like you inherit something in the bloodstream. Faith is not a trait that you can pass on to your children genetically, that you can force upon them. But it can be passed on in the sense like a family heirloom. Now, you can pass on an heirloom to a child that doesn't really appreciate it, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen children that are ungrateful, or they don't really have the same sentimental value that their parent had for something, and so when they do get something, they throw it away immediately, or they don't see it as something that's valuable. The child has the option on that. They can't choose their genes, but they can choose their faith. They can choose whether or not to take something that their parents have given them. And when it comes to faith, there are people that can be successful without having any help from their family monetarily. And in that same sense, there are people that can become very strong in the faith that don't have a great family life. I can think of several people off the top of my head that I could rattle off right here on the air. But the point is, his mother and his grandmother, Lois and Eunice, thought enough of Timothy and cared enough about him and cared enough about God to make sure that Timothy was raised in such a way that he would be ready to serve God when the time came. When he became old enough, when he was going to reach that age of accountability, they wanted to make sure he was prepared for life, but also prepared for a life of walking with God. They wanted to make sure that he had everything that he needed, the knowledge, the good habits, the morality that was going to carry him through a life of service to God. And there's no telling how many people Timothy baptized. There's no telling how many people Timothy taught and helped bring closer to Christ because of their good foundation. Because of that foundation that they laid for him and made sure that Timothy was ready for the task at hand. And that's why I think it's so incredibly important to bring this up on Mother's Day. Because the world needs really good moms. And I don't want to go off on a diatribe here, but I'm so sick of people essentially suggesting that people don't need moms. When you're talking about the political climate today, there are people that say, oh, well, a man can be a mom. No. We need moms. We need compassionate, caring, nurturing women, and women, as a general rule, are better at those qualities than men are, just as a part of nature. We need a masculine and a feminine influence. Young men need it, and young women need it. You can still be successful without a mom. You can still be raised correctly without a mom. You can still be strong in the faith without a mom. But it's not God's ideal. God always understood how important the mother's role is in the family, and that's why he designed human beings in such a way that his ideal is a mother and a father married to one another for life, raising children. And because of that, if we were just to follow God's model, I know that it can't always be followed perfect. Some people pass away, unfortunate events happen. I understand that life isn't always the ideal. I get that. But what I'm saying is, if this country had more good moms that did stuff like Lois and Eunice and followed in their example and made sure that their kids had this strong foundation of faith to live godly lives, don't you think this country would be a lot better? Don't you think this country would have a lot of the problems that we're having with drugs and crime and all the other things that we have that are real issues that are a sickness on society? Don't you believe that if we had some moms that were doing what they were doing, because not all the time when people engage in those activities is because they didn't have a good mom, but a lot of times it is. They either didn't have a good mom or a good dad, and the absence of either one of those can be detrimental to a child. And so because of that, I want us to really stand here and appreciate the work that a lot of our great moms do. That because of them, if you are a well-adjusted person that is competent, can take care of yourself, is more or less self-sufficient, and has good relationships with others, there's a good chance you had a good mom. And that's what Paul is saying here. He understands that the way Timothy became someone that is useful to him as he is and useful to God as he is because he started with Lois and Eunice. And really, I think that the most appropriate thing you can do this Mother's Day, and I encourage everyone to do this. Yeah, get the flowers or chocolates or whatever else it is that you're planning on getting mom. Get that stuff too. Show your mom you appreciate her. Sure. But you know what I think would be far more effective? You know what I think would be far more important to her, and she'd probably remember a lot more than that? If you are a person of faith, and you know that your mom was a big part of that, then why don't you call her up and tell her that? It doesn't have to be something that's super long or eloquent. Just tell her one story about something she did one time and how that really shaped your faith in God and your walk with Christ. Because I guarantee you do that and you have a mother that's strong in the faith, and you are too, that's going to mean a lot to them. And I think that it meant a lot to Lois and Eunice, that Timothy appreciated them, and that Paul, a third-party observer, appreciated the work that they did with their son and grandson so much that he even mentioned them in the Bible to be read about 2,000 years later by you and me. So the greatest gift I think that you can give your mom is to tell her how she, in her life, brought you closer to Christ. Stay the course, friends.
Is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.